This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try and explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
Hello and good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to another edition of Planet X Live. We've got a great show lined up for you. We're going to be looking at the spooky, paranormal, the unseen, and things that go more than bump in the night. We're going to have a guest on, Don Phillips, who will be speaking at this upcoming Probe International Conference, and he's going to be telling us all about his work with GSI Paranormal Investigations. You're listening to Planet X Live.
Planet X. The truth is on air.
In a recent survey, the BBC found that 42% of people living in the UK believed in ghosts and other paranormal activity. Many of those people said that they would be reluctant to admit this publicly for fear of being ridiculed by family, neighbours and work colleagues, believing that this is just too much of a taboo subject. Others who've experienced activity have had little choice but to ask for help, and often are met with scepticism from those around them who've never experienced any activity themselves. Now, a genuine haunting can be a very traumatic experience for anybody suffering at the hands of unseen forces, and can have a very real and disruptive effect. Towards the end of 2008, Don Phillips founded GSI Paranormal UK. Well known for his independently witnessed capabilities, he and his team offer an ear for those who need someone to listen to.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X, the biggest paranormal show on radio.
Before we have Don on the show, we're going to go over and speak to former guest and friend of Planet X Live, Frank Willis, who's going to give us a summary of the news. Frank, how are you? How are you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks.
Great stuff. Frank, tell us what's got your goat this week. What have you been noticing? What's been happening in the news this week, mate?
Lack of news, actually.
Really?
Well, it's all these warships in the Mediterranean and Gulf seas, all aiming allegedly at Syria.
Yeah.
We're on the verge of World War III. The mainstream media is just reporting trivial little things like the Tory party conference.
I think it's more distraction, Frank, you reckon?
Yeah, definitely a distraction. I mean, at the moment, there's a bill going through Parliament to bring back national service. Yet today at that conference, a colonel stood up and heckled the defence minister and said, "Why are you cutting back on the armed forces?" It's pretty simple. They're cutting back professional soldiers, bring back conscription, you've got cannon fodder.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of what I think is happening.
I think you're right, Frank.
The other with this Middle East, it's definitely a smoke screen for something bigger.
Right. What do you reckon it is, Frank?
I don't know, but Israel has been extremely quiet.
Mm-mm.
The whole world is going on about Syria and did they use chemical weapons? Did they not use chemical weapons? If they had the proof, they'd have invaded or bombed. It's not happened, and Cameron and Obama had to back down red-faced over it because they know that the masses are getting no longer fooled by all their bullshit, all these false flags. Which seems to be happening in Africa now. You know, like I was saying, the trivial little news. If you skim through all the news media, there's a shooting in Mali, there's a shooting in Kenya, there's a shooting in Nigeria, and it's all being blamed on Islamic extremists.
Yeah.
I believe Africa is the next to come under uh, the New World Order's scheme of things. And I
Well,
think what's
it makes
happening with
sense for
Syria,
them wanting to get
that,
their resources, doesn't it, Frank? You know, they
exactly,
want that country's rich resources more than anything. Yeah. Sorry,
exactly.
mate. Go on.
And I think Syria and Iran is the distraction while
Mm-mm.
sneakily they go into Africa and do it. You know,
Wow.
as you know, I'm from Rhodesia or
Yeah.
Zimbabwe,
Yeah.
and I know over the last year, 18 months, America's been doing secret deals with Mugabe over the mineral and diamond rights.
Oh, there you go, Frank.
So, you know, it, it's not a case of what's in the media this week, it's what's lying underneath it.
But we've talked about this before, haven't we? That's just the whole point of how it works to distract people, doesn't it? What was fascinating was you were saying that you haven't watched the news on television for a couple of years, and before you did this for us this week, you actually watched TV for the first time in ages. That was amazing. Tell us about that, Frank. It was really way out there, you know.
Well, when I got asked to do this, I thought, right, I'll watch all the media channels. And I switched the TV on. Well, the first one I
Yeah.
watched was the BBC, or the British Bullshit Corporation, as I call it. And I was like, right, I'm a skeptic of the BBC anyway, so it's like, right,
Yeah.
watch Sky News. Oh, this is identical. Watched Al Jazeera, totally different news topics. And I watched RT, and I was
Yeah.
like, right, I can't believe all this bullshit what's going on the TV. Nobody's actually talking about the news,
No. No.
like down to base levels. Like,
Yeah.
why was there 50,000 people in Manchester today
Yeah.
protesting?
Yeah.
What was that about? It was
Yeah.
about the simple fact that the people are starting to rise up against these tyrannical governments, both here in England, Britain, and
Yeah.
America, and
Yeah.
especially in America. I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine before on Facebook, and he's a Christian. He's anti-war. He's never been a soldier, any, but he's ready
Yeah.
to fight against any oppression now in America. He's arming himself to the teeth, and
Mm-mm.
he's just a normal guy in the street, like the
Mm-mm.
rest of us are. And these governments aren't listening to any of us. They're just
No.
going ahead with their own agenda.
And
And
it's that psychopathic mentality, isn't it? With the complete lack of empathy or compassion. They're just these individuals. I can't call them people, Frank, because I don't think they are people, a lot of them. And they're just ploughing
no,
through, as you said, regardless, to just fulfill their agenda, their private agenda, you know. And it's that tiny 1% of people, isn't it? With all the masses of billions of people, that they have all the wealth, all the power. It's wrong, isn't it? Just this tiny amount of people. But carry on,
it,
Frank. Sorry, mate.
it is wrong. I mean, a
Mm,
good example today, I was a friend's mother's 70th birthday do,
mm-mm.
and her sister said, fracking's the way of the future. And
Goodness me.
I was just like, right, I wonder if she actually would allow me to go onto her property and dig the land underneath it and
Yeah,
search for gold or something, because she
yeah,
wouldn't have it.
yeah.
But she's willing to let them frack underneath her land and not even question it.
But
And
she's
that,
been sold the propaganda, hasn't she, about how it's beneficial, how it's going to be marvelous, and she's not been told the full story. So she's got one
exactly,
version of events. Again, it's just,
exactly.
I think fracking is it's really it's so lunatic. It's the madness, the insanity of it, to the destabilization of everything, not just rock strata and the landscape, but everything that it affects, and the
Of
knock-on
course.
effects of it is just appalling, Frank. But there's one example of somebody who thinks it's a wonderful thing. We need it, you know?
That's
Frightening.
it. That's just one example of what happened today, which
Yeah.
is proving my point that
Yeah.
people are either living in a bubble
Yeah.
that subconsciously they know something big is going to happen, but they're in denial of it,
Yeah.
or they're actually that dumbed down and that stupid that they can't see beyond the end of the nose.
Yeah.
And,
And that's a big problem as well, isn't it? People
and
just. Mm.
which is like, if somebody says to me, "Oh, how dare you call me stupid," and all that. Well, I picked up on something in the news this week. There
Right.
was an application for iPhones which said
Right.
it would make your iPhone waterproof. Well, people downloaded it and dropped their iPhones in buckets of water and things. I mean, that is stupid. You know, the elite know this, and it was probably a psyops
I just thought that was an April
operation
Fool's
just
joke.
to see
If you,
what people would do. Only,
honestly, it's what you mean. Like, let's see who's really stupid. let's
yeah,
let's let's work it out. What we'll do is this. I think that's really. Honestly, I think that I would have thought that that was a. If it was April, that was an April Fool's joke you were telling me there. But no, you're saying that's actually happened. That's been in the news this week.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh, I couldn't stop laughing when I first saw it. I thought, oh, what kind of a
oh,
person would do that?
that's a peach, isn't it? That's an
Yeah,
absolute peach. Peach for the sheeple. I think
yeah.
that's really good. Do you know, I think there'll be a lot of people who did that and they're just going to be too embarrassed to actually cough to that now and admit it, that's what
Oh,
they.
yeah. Oh, I wonder how many accidentally dropped them down the toilet.
That's really good. Well, Frank, I just want to say thanks to you for coming on and joining us this week. We'd like to ask you to come back on again and do the same sometime. And just before you go, Frank, you mentioned that your base chakra you noticed when you were watching television closed. Tell us about that before you go.
Oh, for those who don't know what chakras are, the human body is a living being, and it's the living or life force which you, but it connects on the outside through energy centers, chakras, and there's 7 major chakras. Uh, your base chakra, which is your lower chakra at the base of your spine, that I could feel that closing down when I was watching the TV, because as you know, I practice Tai Chi every day, and I'm well aware of my own energy and
Yeah.
what does affect my energy.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed at how the TV was affecting that base chakra and closing it down.
And we know as well, don't we, that just the flickering of the screen itself just, it puts us into zombie mode because the frequency of that flickering of the TV screen. So it's got to affect everything, hasn't it?
Yeah, of course it does. Everything does. Any frequency or vibration affects anything else around it.
Message here is don't watch television. Don't watch television. Instead, switch on and listen to Planet X Live. That's the message we're giving out tonight anyway. But thank you so much, Frank, for coming on the show and for joining us. And as I say, we would like to get you back to do this again. And I really appreciate the input that you've made for us for the show, Frank. So for now, Frank Willis, thank you so much for joining us on Planet X Live.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers.
Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email. Find us on Facebook.
Don Phillips was born into a military family on the island of Gibraltar in 1966. And from a very early age, he realized that he possessed a strange affinity with the unseen spirit world that is so intimately linked to our own. At the age of 7, over a period of a few days, he felt and actually saw a dark yet formless entity in his bedroom. An entity that drew ever closer until at last it directly confronted him. Don is not sure to this day if this entity actually enveloped him or stopped immediately in front of him. But whatever occurred, it suddenly vanished and perhaps intentionally left an enduring and bizarre legacy. Joining us now on the line is, in fact, Don Phillips himself. Don Phillips, welcome to Planet X Live. How are you, Don?
Thank you and good evening. I'm fine. How's yourself?
Great. Don, you haven't spoken at Probe International Conference before, have you?
No, I haven't. No.
That's terrific. Are you looking forward to it? Have you ever actually been to the conference before?
Yeah, I went to the conference last year. Found it very interesting mix of people, and I am very much enjoying the fact that I will actually be there this year to present the work and some of my findings.
Brilliant. Don, we said in your introduction how you were born into this military family in Gibraltar, etc., and how it's really only in the last 18 months that you have decided that you're going to go public with your work. Now, before you tell us about what brought you to that decision to effectively just make that commitment, as I know you have, tell us a little bit about when you were young and about these things that occurred, with these visitations. Did it freak you out? Tell our listeners from the beginning how you felt when these things began to occur to you. How old were you? Was it at about 7, wasn't it, when you became consciously aware of this stuff happening over a period of days?
Yeah, that's correct. It was somewhere around about between the ages of 7 and 8. Just like any other, young child, used to go to bed, do my puzzle or whatever before it was lights out. But these particular nights, the first night, something strange started happening. I put the lights out, just went to go to sleep as normal. I heard a distinct, very loud rustling in each ear, as though somebody had actually rustling an old paper bag. At the same time, I noticed that the temperature, I could feel the temperature drops in my face. I wouldn't say I was scared or frightened. I had no idea what it was whatsoever. The next morning, I mentioned it to my mother, who kind of didn't make any big deal of it. It was a couple of days later. She said, "I've searched your bedroom and there's nothing in there to make a rustle. You must have been dreaming." It's a typical reaction, what you'd expect.
Yeah.
Over the next few nights, not continual, there was probably maybe 3-4 nights in between. Then I had what I can only describe as visitations. At night time, I was quite familiar with being able to see around my bedroom with the lights out, because outside we had a street light which used to just dimly light up the room, just enough for me to see all the way around the edge of the ceiling in the corners. Yeah. This next night when this occurred, I noticed in the corner, for some reason, I couldn't actually see anything. Yeah. It was just a dark patch that I'd never actually noticed before. I didn't pay much attention to that. It looked like it was moving, but again, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Over the preceding nights, it looked as though it was getting bigger and bigger. One night that really stands out was the night before what I'd say was the final visit, where the temperature was that cold, it instantly snapped cold, and I could actually see my breath, in the night, in the light from the window. At that stage, I realised then, this mass or whatever it was, at the time I couldn't actually describe it as anything, obviously because I didn't have any idea of these things. It wasn't actually getting bigger. I noticed it was actually getting closer. This happened another couple of times until finally it was quite literally in front of my face. Now, it was so close, at that point I just closed my eyes, woke up the next morning, and I haven't got a clue what happened. I've got no memory whatsoever. But what I can say is I could actually see the form. It was just a big lumpy form. If you imagine what a brain looks like, forgetting it's a brain for the moment, just the initial, the surface, it was like that, but a lot softer. So, yeah, that's pretty much, in a very quick nutshell, where it all started from.
Don, that's incredible. Were you not kind of freaked out by this? How did it make you feel? You were so young.
This is the interesting thing I still find interesting to this day. I wouldn't say I was actually frightened at any stage. I was very apprehensive and nervous, but I wasn't actually frightened. The interesting thing was, 2-3 nights later, there was quite a kerfuffle in my sister's room. I got twin sisters. They was born in Gibraltar as well. They scrambled from the bed, ran into my mother's room, and I followed to see what was going on. And they said they'd had a visit from Auntie Joan. Now, interestingly, our Auntie Joan, she was very severely mentally handicapped, and she died 2-3 weeks earlier. They described, my mother again says, "Oh, go back to bed, you must be dreaming." But she got very intrigued, and so did I, when they started to describe what she was actually wearing, the gown that she was actually wearing that she was buried in. And at the time, my mother placed a very distinctive design ring on her finger. Because of her severe deformity in her fingers as well, the ring would not fit on all of the fingers. So it was actually on a, I'm not sure which finger it was, but it was one that you wouldn't normally wear a ring on. My sisters described this in great detail. When my mother said, "What did she say?" All she said was, "Is your mother okay?" They said yes, and she just disappeared, and that was it. So that was very, very intriguing account to me, bearing in mind what I'd experienced just prior to that. And obviously, even though I was young, I started putting two and two together, kind of thing. And things have kind of progressed from there.
When you say they progressed, did you continue to increasingly have these experiences, or were they just intermittent? I'm asking because so many people have experiences themselves, our listeners, they're curious. There's no definitive textbook way in which things develop, Don, as you know, but it's interesting to hear other people's experiences and how they developed. Over the next few years, what started to happen in terms of realization of what you were connecting with?
Yeah, things did carry on, but that last visitation where literally it was in my face, and then I just effectively, some people say fell asleep, some people say lost consciousness. I have absolutely no idea. I just woke up the next morning. It was like a normal day. But it was after that I started feeling things. I didn't know what it was, and it's still hard to describe to this day. When I mentioned it to my mother, I can remember she used to say, "Oh, someone's walked over my grave," you know, like grown-ups do occasionally when they shiver. And because I was young, I just used to think it was that to begin with. But this presence, which I now know was spirit presence, actually got stronger and stronger and stronger over a period of time. And I'd go to a family funeral, probably at the age of about 10. As soon as I got in the cemetery, I'd just feel surrounded by this presence. At school, I'd be surrounded by this presence. Sometimes it'd be that strong, it was almost unbearable. But it's a very strange place to be when you start to become aware of what it actually is, and yet you don't feel as though you can tell anybody.
Tell me, Ben, have you had those sensations before? I think a lot of people have. Have you ever experienced that sort of build-up of energy that Don's describing?
Yes, in fact, that was really interesting what Don has been talking about, because it really rang a bell with me. There's many times when I've had, well, not only have I had, peculiar experiences and I've seen strange things, but that feeling of energy building up, that feeling of that makes you want to look over your shoulder all the time. This happened a lot, especially when I was at my hospital portering, because hospital seems to be the place where all kinds of ghost stories come out of, and loads of them, and it's also strange, just that creeping feeling that Don was talking about. That's very, very true, yeah.
Well, that residual energy. Don, what are you picking up at the moment whilst you're talking to us here?
To be perfectly honest with you, the last few minutes just after we started, the energy started building. And obviously, I spend a lot of time in the workshop with the guys. This is our place where we talk and where we do our thing. At the minute, I'm absolutely buzzing.
That's terrific. Guys, you're listening to Planet X Live.
You're listening to Planet X. Planet X, the biggest paranormal show on radio.
Don, you just told us that you were in your workshop. Now, I take it that this is obviously where you work from. Is it at home? Is it an outbuilding, or is it part of your home?
It initially it's part of the home. It was a workshop actually built to do some IT work from many years ago. But it seems to be the main centre of everything spiritual over the last few years. The amount of different spirits I get visiting me here is absolutely incredible. I have the ones that live with me all the time, the ones I've got to know on a personal level, but I'm forever getting all types coming through, good, bad, and indifferent, even demonic. Right.
Now, we're going to talk to you in a moment and ask you to tell us about the terrific team of 5 or 6 people you work with directly for investigation, paranormal investigation, and that's your GSI team. And before we do, I want you to tell our listeners about how you work uniquely, which is recording digital voice phenomena And just give them an idea, please, Don, how you work that's unique, please.
Okay, first of all, what I'll say is what appears to be paranormal in nature to most people is because I've grown up with it from such a young age, and it's been a daily occurrence since then. I consider it perfectly normal. Over many, many years, I've developed relationships with a lot of the spirits. I find communication with the spirits extremely easy. I've never had a problem with it. I don't use any equipment other than digital recorders. Of course, the voices will vary in loudness, some loud, some a little bit quiet, but that is greatly affected by the atmospheric conditions at the time. So yeah, I spend, me and the team, we spend a lot of time going around helping people that have actually got problems with paranormal activity in their homes.
And when you do, you go in with the voice recorders, don't you, to help communicate with the... I liked how you didn't describe the people that you work with, the non-physical people, as spirit guides. You said, no, they're not my spirit guides. They're my friends, because you have developed relationships with them, and that's how you see them. Tell us a bit about Becky. Becky's one of your main co-workers who's actually not physically here. She's in spirit.
Becky has been with me for an awful long time now. She's always there for me. She assists me a great deal on investigations. I would say investigations. When I say investigations, they're not your traditional type investigating everything. Typical scenario will be, I'll get a phone call. We don't go out to investigate if people say, I think I've got a ghost, and you can have a look. I only deal with people that are affected very, very badly by what they're experiencing, very extreme cases. Now, as I say to our clients, despite the description they give us or what they think is occurring, or no matter how credible it sounds, when we go into a place, although we take that on board, we can only comment and deal with what we find when we get there. Because quite often people will interpret anything as paranormal when they're actually in that frame of mind. So it is very important that when we go into a place, we are totally open-minded and we find out when we get there.
Becky, whom you work with, who's in spirit, Don, she actually died in some kind of a tragic crash in 1995. But she has children as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because people would find that very fascinating, knowing that you could trace Becky's existence when she was physically here.
Becky is actually in spirit with her children. There's a boy and a young girl called Emily. I've actually spoken to Emily and her son on one occasion, which was probably about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When I speak to Becky, it's generally just Becky that I speak to, unless I actually say, is Emily there? In which case, Becky will reply. The thing you've got to understand, Becky is the key part of everything I do, because although there's lots of spirits that I know, relationships of just mutual trust and respect with spirits are very, very rare. To actually have somebody you can rely on 100% is obviously a big bonus. So if, for example, a spirit came in here, I didn't recognise the voice, and he told me something, I would automatically say, Becky, is that correct? And she would straight away say, yes, it is, or no, it's not. I can actually give you an example of that.
Yes, please.
7 months ago, my partner Rachel was in the workshop. The energy was very, very strong. I felt something slightly different. I put the recorder on, and I said, who's that? A gentleman came on, and he says, I'm her granddad. And I said, who's granddad? And he said, Rachel's. The interesting thing here was, well, the spirits won't speak to anybody else. Rachel can be here with me, and they won't reply to her. I have to ask the questions for her in order to get the reply. So in the end, he said he was her granddad, blah, 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 blah. And I says, Becky, is this her granddad, or is this somebody else? And Becky said, granddad is fake. That is, like I say, Becky, she's a very integral part of what I do, and mainly for that reason.
So who do you think that spirit was that was coming through, making out that it was Rachel's grandfather?
I've absolutely no idea. It could have been just somebody playing, somebody messing about. Quite often malevolent spirits will portray themselves as somebody else, or sometimes even a child. This is how vulnerable a lot of people are out there. People think they're communicating sometimes with relatives, or they're hearing a child. That's not necessarily the fact, you know. This is
it keeps it very in keeping with what one of our former guests, who's a paranormal researcher and researcher about other subjects, Rosemary Allen Galley, talked about. Now, we know that the Ouija board, for example, which we do not advocate, Planet X listeners, that anybody use, but we know that you too are not comfortable or would not recommend that people use a Ouija board. But this appears to be one of the ways in which spirits will jump in, earthbound spirits, more earthbound spirits, to people who are feeling vulnerable, who want to communicate with people. Tell us your feelings about the Ouija board, please, Don.
Right, I could personally use a Ouija board quite safely and without problem, but I won't, because it sends out the wrong signal. And for me to say to people, these can be dangerous, and then them seeing me using them, doesn't actually work very well. Now, a Ouija board is actually not that much different to a digital recorder in the fact you are inviting spirits to communicate with you.
Yeah.
The main thing is about Ouija board, if you were to use a board in a room which has got, shall we say, half a dozen friendly spirits in there, and they were capable of actually interacting with that board, you won't have a problem. The problem is, if you're using that board in a room which has actually got an active portal and anything can come through, and you manage to get something negative, that's where the problems come in. But I agree with you, I don't think they should use it at all. And the fact, these are actually sold as child's games. I find absolutely incredible.
Well, they've been around for a long, long time. Ben, have you heard about people having negative experiences with using a Ouija board?
I have had a couple of that have gone round. I mean, I've never used one myself, and I would not want to. And I advise people. I say it's not a good idea to use one. I mean, there's some people who say, well, who say you can get trained to use them properly, and I don't know about that, but
So I totally disagree with that. There's a lot of misconceptions. You've got to understand, I've been around these spirits a long time. They've been telling me things for a long time. And there's many, many misconceptions about the way things are in the spirit world, the way things are supposed to be on a paranormal investigation, Ouija boards, protections, and everything else. At the end of the day, people are, whoever you are, protection, no protection, opening it or closing it, you're going to be just as vulnerable. I actually made a video which is on the channel. And as I always says to people, you don't have to listen to me telling you anything, because at the end of the day, that is just words, and everybody's got a different opinion on the subject. I said, Becky, Ouija boards, some people say they're dangerous, some people say they're harmless, some people say they work, some people say they don't work. Can you tell our viewers, what would you say, Becky? A very good reply. She just went, they're very, very dangerous. And that's coming from a spirit. That's not coming from somebody with an opinion. You know, so as I say to people, you can argue with me as much as you want, but I tend to take the advice from the guys which probably really know, who are the best authority on such things.
Yeah. I mean, I know someone who said that they got a bad spirit hanging around them when they used a Ouija board. I know someone who said that.
Yeah, well, I remember I had a go at it many, many years ago, and to be honest with you, it shit the living crap out of me. We were all around this table doing this Ouija board, and I really didn't think much of it at the time, and it was horrible. There was doors opening and everything else like that. Very, very scary. Very scary. Wouldn't do it again.
People say... Sorry.
I was going to say, what would you say would be happening there? But go on, you were about to say, mate.
Well, there'll be people out there that will be disagreeing, obviously, which is fine. And so they've been saying, I've been using it for years, and you know everything's fine. But everything is always fine until you get a negative attachment. That's when things go wrong. I had a phone call from a medium who I won't mention last year. He'd been using one for years. He'd been telling everybody these are okay. He got in a right pickle, and he rang me up and asked me to go out and sort it out for him. Yeah. This is not people's imagination. This is not a need to believe. These things can be dangerous. The other problem that you've got is when these things are actually tested in what they call controlled conditions, many people do admittedly fool themselves, because you'll have a group with their fingers on the planchette and it's moving all over the place. I can tell you factually that is not the way it works. For any spirit to be able to manipulate anything, whether it's a Ouija board or whether to speak loud and clearly, the conditions are not going to be close, they've got to be absolutely spot on. So if you were to take a board and have 20 attempts, I would say realistically, to get anywhere close to real interaction, you would probably only achieve maybe 2 or 3 times, if that.
I want to ask you particularly now about some of the paranormal investigations that you've gone on, because we're going to provide some links for our listeners to go and have a look on YouTube, but we're also going to have a listen to some MP3 recordings of some of the investigations that you've gone on.
The radio show that officially does not exist. This is Planet X. Planet X.
Now, before we actually go to have a listen to some of the clips that you've collected as evidence with some of your investigations, Don, I want you to tell us about this team of terrific people who work with you and what it is that they do. There's about 6 of you all together, isn't there?
That's great, yeah. Well, starting with my partner of 20 years, Rachel, she actually joined the team probably only 18 months ago. Initially, although she knew what I did, she'd never actually been out with me. But when she did, she had quite an awakening, shall we say. Then we've got Marie. She's a government counsellor. I joined Marie probably a couple of years ago now. There's Alison. She deals with horses. Hayley. She works at a university. Tony's ex-RAF. And there was Nick, but he's just recently left to pursue other things for the time being, so he's taken a break. But Nick's actually a presenter, Sky presenter.
Now,
but they're all
Nick,
absolutely wonderful.
Sorry, Tony is ex-Air Force, isn't he? He's retired, but he's your techie. He's the guy who sets up all your monitors, your CCTV equipment, and obviously he's going to be the one that's helping to record some of these voices that you pick up, as well as your device. Now, we're going to go over to listen to one of the clips that came from something we're going to provide our listeners with on YouTube from one of the Northampton hauntings and the investigation that you did there. Now, you've told us you're particularly proud of this recording because it's somebody claiming to be St. Michael. Before we hear it, tell us a little bit about this investigation and what happened there, please, Don.
I'm not so much proud about the recording. It was a proud moment that really stands out. Certainly, I received a phone call actually. Somebody got in contact with Nick, of a young lady in Northampton who was said to be experiencing extreme paranormal activity. We went along. I went upon entering the house. It was obvious there was a great deal of stuff going on. Now, so scared was this lady, she'd actually moved out the house and she was living in a neighbour's garden in a tent, although it was freezing cold. Over 2 visits, we established through Becky that there was approximately 20 spirits. After a great effort and some time, I actually came down to the last one. Now, the last one was actually demonic. I made a devil trap and asked him to basically come show me, for better phrase, come and show me what you've got, sort of thing. Okay, because I do challenge directly. And he says, no, you're trying to trick me. And then I literally pointed to the floor and said, do you know what this is? And he said, it's a devil trap. Said, do you want me to move this? And this was the quite funny part. And he said, yes, please. Anyway, he still wouldn't come near me. And then I said to Nick, there's something changing here which I've not actually felt before. He says, what do you mean? I said, I don't know, I can't actually describe it, Nick. There's still energy, but there's something different going on. Then I felt something really, really strong inside of me, and I just put my call and said, who's there? The voice came back, if you're about to hear, it was very profound. It says, it's Michael, you know. It was absolutely fantastic. It is quite a momentous moment for me. Now, I can't say 100% whether that was St. Michael or not, but the one thing that I can say is, out of all the recordings I took when I was there, on this particular recording, this wasn't a top-of-the-range recorder. There was no static whatsoever. Just on that one recording, all the static disappeared and the voice was absolutely perfect. After that recording, that was it. I couldn't take any more. There was just one that says, we're leaving. And after that, there was nothing. And I said to Becky, is it all sorted? And she said, yes, it's sorted. Okay. Now, that sounds very simplistic. There's a lot more to it than that, but just rounding this up, that's what's happened, and that's how we got this clip.
Great. We're going to take a listen to that now. So, Planet X listeners, peel back your ears, have a good listen. And this is the original MP3 that Don Phillips recorded, where the communication claims to be St. Michael. Here we go.
Is that? What I'm waiting for? Is that? What I'm waiting for? Is that? What I'm waiting for? Is that? What I'm waiting for?
prior to that recording was a demonic screech which went through the whole house. It's fair to say it actually scared Alison and Nick half to death. Unfortunately, we didn't actually manage to capture that on a recording because obviously we didn't know it was going to happen.
Yeah, naturally. But an interesting thing all the same. We're going to have a listen to another clip of an MP3 recording. Don, tell us a little bit about this. This is very interesting.
Okay, me and the team were actually almost ready to start a series of experiments. Having spoken to Robin Foy and him being aware of me and what I do, he was very supportive in the fact we were actually going to do Skull 2. To do that, we need to find a location, cellar. This cellar was very active. I chose it, the team agreed. I got on with a lot of the spirits there, and then we started taking recordings. But to make it slightly different, I needed to find some way to actually separate the spirit voices replies from anything else in the room. So I adopted the use of a big glass dome, vase probably a better description. And what I would do is I would ask a question, put the recorder under the dome, and then take it out 15-20 seconds later to see what we'd actually captured. The main purpose is, as it would explain, to separate voices from the sounds in the room, but also because it's inside the dome, it's actually got a different tone to as if it had been taken outside the dome, which obviously makes it obviously more credible. This next recording was actually one of the many recordings captured that night under the dome, where the recorder was placed under, left for 15 seconds, and then taken out and played. On here, there's a very clear female voice that you're about to hear who said, "Who's there?" And then there's a gentleman that says, "Don't." Now you've got to bear in mind this is in a totally silent room in a cellar below ground level. Absolutely no sound from any of us whatever. There's no way this could be radio signals or anything. Radio signals can't even penetrate that cellar. You can't get a signal, you can't get anything. So anyway, here it is.
Right. Who's it?
What's the beginning? That's the bit I heard. Listen.
No. No.
Wow, that's interesting. Ben, could you hear that as well?
Yeah, I could hear it perfectly. Yeah, it's definitely
Don,
a voice, a female voice.
Yeah. Don, what did you make of it when you picked that up at the time?
Because it was halfway through the investigation we was doing, I got quite used to the replies coming from the dome, but I'm always impressed when we start getting replies like that, which are obviously clear spoken English. Yeah.
Now, you've got another clip which was part of the same video. Again, we're going to provide
the same
this.
experiment, that's correct.
We're going to put the links up for our listeners. Tell us about this next clip before you play it for us, please, Don.
This was actually taken just prior to the clip you just played, and it was under the same circumstances. Total silence in the room, recorder under the dome. This sounds very much like Christ will save all his children, which anything with religious tones, assuming that's what's happening, I always find quite interesting. Following that, the second recording sounds like I'll save the rest of them, or why save the rest of them. I'm not actually clear on that. At the end of the day, we can only comment on what we can hear at the time. So whether it says Christ will save all his children or not is for the people to decide.
Right, sit quietly, Stephen. Right, sit quietly, Stephen. Right, sit quietly, Stephen. Right, sit quietly, Stephen.
Don, what do you make of that? That's really clear.
Yeah, but like I said, it's all to do with energy, and so some will be clearer than others. But casting back to the skull experiment, just briefly, this does actually relate to that, because one of the things that the spirits asked them to do was actually put a glass dome on the table to store the energy in.
I remember.
Based on that, yeah, it wouldn't be any surprise to me if they was actually using that in some way, and I don't know if they was. This is just pure speculation, but that, without doubt, was certainly using a lot of energy and a very clear, loud reply, as were many more that evening as well.
Ben, what do you make of this?
That was, I mean, I'm familiar with the skull experiment, and I've read the book and I've watched the movie, and it is really quite amazing. Now,
Ben, tell our listeners about that experiment.
The skull experiment, I think, was carried out a few years ago now, and it was a place called Skull, which I think is in Suffolk, and a group of researchers got together and decided with some mediums, and they decided to do an experiment which they took place in what they call the Skull Hole, it became known as, but it was actually a cellar of a house, and quite remarkable things occurred, including the things that Don has talked about, similar to what Don has discovered. Also, photographs appeared on film, and even apports, which are solid physical objects, were generated and they actually appeared, including very, very genuine-looking newspapers from 60 years ago and things like that, which were made with the same paper and the same ink that they used back then. So these weren't just back numbers you ordered, you know. And it was really, really. The whole details are in this book called The Skull Experiment, and there's a film as well. It was a while ago I saw it. I don't remember all the details, but I remember being enormously impressed by it, I found it very, very, very fascinating.
Obviously, Don, how does this key in with those experiments, with your work and what you're saying about the dome in terms of controlled conditions?
The conditions could have been maybe slightly more controlled, because this actually wasn't an official experiment down there. Like I said, it was the first time we went down, so I could just see what the relationship was like with the spirits at the time, how strong the communication was, how much energy there was, and how far I'd be able to push things. This was literally for me to go down and see what I could achieve with minimum effort. One of the things that I always enjoy is, such as that recording you just played, it sounds like a very strong European accent, and recordings which are very, very loud, very clear, and obviously a different accent are a lot better than just, you know, just somebody saying something.
Have you ever had anything come through with a completely foreign language?
Yeah, on the same experiment there's a female, a lady who apparently, I don't actually speak French, unfortunately, but it sounds French. So if anybody could actually listen to that when they watch the video and tell me what they think she's saying. It is very, very clear, but I say I don't know the language. So any feedback on that would be appreciated.
Okay. Now the next clip, clips we're going to go to, these are also from the same video that we're going to provide the link for, aren't they?
Yeah, that's correct. This next one literally followed the one you just played, the one that could be saying Christ will save all his children.
Okay, we're going to have a listen to that, and we're going to play it for you now. This next clip, we're actually going to hear it, and it actually says that you think it says, throw the flask down. We're going to have a listen to it. When we've had a listen to it, we're going to ask you, Don, to talk us through it. Here it is. Don, what was going on there? What does that mean, throw the flask down? Tell us about it.
I spent some time thinking about this a few minutes after that, and the only thing I can relate it to is that he may have meant the glass dome on the table. That's the only thing that I can think of. Nothing else makes any sense to me. It certainly sounds like throw the flask down. It's very, very clear, but that's the only thing I said I think he could be speaking about.
Don, if you throw a flask down that's glass, is it not going to break, or is that the intention, do you think?
Oh, it would certainly break. But yeah, he may have not liked the fact that we were using that on the table for whatever reason. But I mean, that is speculation. I've got no way of actually knowing that. I can only interpret the recording and the circumstances as they actually occur.
Right. Now we're going to come to another video clip, which is MP3, I should say. And this is very interesting. And here we go. Don, we're going to have a listen, and then I'm going to ask you to talk us through this. Here we go. Well, you could hear those words very clearly. Come listen to this. Could you hear that, Ben?
Yes, perfectly.
Brilliant. This is interesting, Don. This is from a very different investigation. It's from what's called the Barkby haunting, B-A-R-K-B-Y. We're going to put the link up on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, where people can go and have a look at it. Tell us about this. Very interesting. The whole family moved home, didn't they, Don?
That's correct. I received what I consider a random phone call from a professional lady who says, "Can you come and check to see if I've got something in my house?" Now, normally under them circumstances, the answer would be no, because I tend to deal with cases where people are actually being affected greatly emotionally. But because it was very, very local to me, me and Alison agreed to pop down for a couple of hours. As soon as we walked in there, it was apparent to me that she did indeed have guests. That clip, the circumstances around that differs from the others greatly because it wasn't captured on the digital recorder at all. There was myself, Alison, and Louise in this kitchen. It's a big farmhouse. Total silence. I didn't even know we'd captured that until I was actually editing the footage. And that came, it sounds like a kind of, how would you describe it, a wenchy type voice. And she seems to be responding to me playing a recording from the recorder to Louise. But say that was actually captured on the video camera, which is why there's absolutely no static whatsoever.
And this is the same image, or is this the same image that was picked up? We've got an incredible still in the kitchen of that house. Is that the same experience, Don?
That is the house. The 2 hours turned into an all-night investigation.
You've just told us about this being picked up on a video, audio recording on a video, the soundtrack. And again, we're going to provide a very interesting still from that video clip of a really odd looking entity or experience of energy that's manifested and was caught on the video. We've got a still of that. We're going to put that up. Tell us about that. That was also in the kitchen, wasn't it, Don?
Yeah. Like I said, there was just 3 of us in there. The 2-hour investigation actually turned into an all-night investigation. I spoke to several spirits that reside in there. Nothing negative. The problem that Louise was having is a partner, he was feeling it very, very strongly, and that's the main reason they wanted to move. So it was a brilliant investigation. Obviously, when we came across that, forget the fact we was there all night, just that one recording itself, that doesn't show, there's no alternative explanation for that. That's not people walking by. I mean, we're talking at what? Possibly 2 o'clock in the morning in a kitchen with 3 people in a farmhouse. And obviously that sound is in the immediate vicinity of the camera, not something in the distance.
You're listening to Don Phillips, paranormal and psychic investigator, and this is Planet X Live.
Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email. Find us on Facebook. Planet X.
Don, what's just happened? Something very odd's just happened to you there in your workshop. Tell us about this.
I just heard a kind of a shh noise, turned around and actually saw the lights. I've got an external speaker that I use that I often plug the digital recorder in because obviously the sound's clearer. And it was actually switched on. The only way you can actually switch this on is to use the push button on the side of it. So that would be the guys telling me that the energy is good and that they are here. So after the show, I'm going to have a chat with them.
Okay, and are you going to record that, Don? Are you gonna, if something happens, are you gonna let our listeners have a listen to it or watch it?
Oh, absolutely. I'll make a video and post you the link, and it will literally be me and the guys speaking about the show. I'll ask them what they thought.
That's terrific. That's great. Now that takes us very nicely to something I want to tell our listeners about, which you took part in. And quite a few people that we know took part in the same program on ITV, on the This Morning program, some of our former guests actually. And it was very highly criticised. A lot of people had a lot of opinions about how this was handled, but it was called Paranormal Week, and it was on the This Morning show on ITV, and you were invited to take part. People may or may not remember this about what you picked up about somebody that used to work in the area where the studios.
It was a fascinating investigation.
Brilliant. And also what happened to the footage. Don, tell us all about that, because the footage disappeared. But let our listeners know what that was all about, what you picked up with Norman.
Okay. As part of as you've explained, the investigation, the Paranormal Week, I was invited to conduct a paranormal paranormal investigation in the studio in search for a supposed poltergeist by the name of Norman Grimshaw, who was said to have worked and died, not at the studio, but I believe it was actually a brewery or something before then. A lot of the staff had reported instant hearing things, and one even said she'd seen something. When we turned up, myself and Nick turned up at the studio, they made it quite clear, we don't expect to find anything, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
My direct response to that was, if you don't want me to find anything, you should have called somebody else. Becky was with me. The crew wanted one thing that they actually requested, because they'd seen some clips on YouTube. Can we hear a sentence from Becky? So yeah, I promised them they would hear a sentence from Becky. Throughout the investigation, I wasn't allowed to mention the word spirits, communicating with spirits, or actually using the digital recorder. But on a couple of 10-minute breaks, I did pull the recorder out to speak to Becky. I asked Becky, is there a poltergeist here called Norman?
Yeah.
Her clear reply was, I'm in the hub and Norman's there.
Yeah.
When this was played to the crew, they was well, they was very, very surprised, to be honest. And even the producer, Tom, then, I don't know whether it's something interpreted, but he said he'd been poked in the eye and it kind of freaked him out. Getting back after the investigation to the hotel, absolutely totally worn out, been in bed for less than half an hour, the phone went. ITV rang me up and said, Don, have you got any footage? I said, why? All of ours has been totally white, so I can't explain it, it's all disappeared. And also,
when they said footage to you, Don, did they mean video? Were you also one of your guys was also video recording? Is that what you mean?
I had Nick following me around with a handycam, but they was talking specifically about the ITV footage from their equipment, which he says effectively there's no idea how that could have happened. It was just totally blank. The word was wiped, quite literally wiped. At the same time, the two editing consoles that they would have used to edit that footage both crashed at the same time. We went down to the studio to see what we could do to help them put something together. When I got back, I was very, very curious. So in the hotel room, and I do look very, very effectively bad on this footage because I've been up for hours, I can hardly string a sentence together. I said, guys, the footage, it disappeared. Does anybody know anything about it? Becky, do you know anything about it? Somebody come back straight away, and it's crystal clear. He just went, it's shit. It was shit. I'm sorry, but that's what's said, and you did ask me the question.
No, I actually watched it on YouTube, and you do look like you haven't slept for 52 hours or something.
Yeah,
you do actually genuinely look like you're going to collapse, but you're lying on the bed in the hotel and.
Yeah, he said, now we're in the shit, or worse to that effect.
Yeah.
The next recording was, Are You Mad With Us? But they effectively said they deleted it. Later on when I asked Becky, they said, this is their words, not mine, they deleted it because they wasn't happy with the way I was being portrayed and the way it was put together. Becky certainly wasn't happy with the fact that we wasn't allowed to use digital recorders in the main shoot. And I know that the guys were really looking forward to that because they like to be heard, they want to be heard, they want to get it out there that they're actually real. Okay.
Well, how were they expecting you to record Becky if you didn't have these digital recorders to hand them? What were they asking you to do if that's the way you work? I don't get it.
No, well, it's TV land. It was for a segment that they asked me to do, set up trigger objects and things like that, all of which I wouldn't normally do because, as you know, I deal with direct spirit contact. But they wasn't happy. The footage disappeared. I even actually go back to the producers and say, they deleted it. He said, sorry, you did. He said, I said, the spirit guys, I actually played on the recording and I was blown away. They said, can we play that on air? I said, absolutely. I was elated by that. It never got played, not unsurprisingly.
Just said it then, it's TV land. Obviously, if things don't go great and it's just how it turns out at the time. But you also have your skeptics, your regular panel of skeptics that always come out for television. That's the way it works.
Absolutely.
And what was your experience with skeptics or the skeptic on the show there, Don?
Well, generally, my experiences to date with skeptics and media is everybody is asking for proof. Everybody wants to see something interesting and exciting, as long as it's not too real. If it's too real, it never seems to get put out there in mainstream TV. I know there's Ofcom rules and everything to consider, but it's a great shame that you almost feel as though you're being silenced all the time. As far as skeptics are concerned, skepticism, wonderful, fantastic, absolutely normal. But there's a distinct difference between open-minded skepticism and cynics posing as skeptics. Unfortunately, since stepping into the public eye, public arena as it were, I've encountered more than my fair share of people who I would say are cynics posing as skeptics, people that quite happy to sit there and judge people, not just me, but other paranormal teams, without actually being there, without actually analysing any evidence, just based on the fact that that's what they think. See, this is quite interesting because skeptics will argue it's a need to believe. It's a belief process. But they've got to understand that they therefore must be using exactly the same belief structure, but in opposition to come to their conclusions.
Ben, you've got a nice take on skeptics. Tell us about this, because you really have. You've witnessed a lot of things going on in the mainstream media and elsewhere. Tell us how you feel about these people, particularly Chris French. You've had a few observations of him yourself, haven't you?
Definitely, I've met the man a few times. I made a comedy video about him too, which he
Did you?
had the good decency to laugh at it. Yeah. Now, I've actually, unlike many people, sort of on our side of the fence, I've studied the skeptic argument and the individuals and the culture of skeptics, the skeptic movement, so to speak. I've read skeptic books by people like Richard Wiseman and Andy Roberts and people like that, Richard Dawkins, and I've also been to skeptic events, include like Skeptics in the Pub and TAM London, which are big skeptic conferences and meetings. Now, as you know, I mean, I've spoken about this before on the show. I believe that the political class in this world are actually actively trying to cover up the kind of things that Dom is researching. This doesn't mean that skeptics are agents of that political class. Some of them might be. I think there's a couple of, I won't name any names, but there's a few people I'm suspicious of in that respect. But what I found most of them are, I mean, I think I've made exactly the same observation as Don, really. I mean, the way they define themselves, you see, because I think most skeptics actually don't even know what they are. They have a misconception of themselves. Like, for instance, the definition of a skeptic, according to their own website, is one who rigorously and openly applies the methods of science and reason to all empirical claims. A skeptic provisionally proportions acceptance of any claim to valid logic and a fair and thorough assessment of the available evidence, and studies the pitfalls of human reason and the mechanisms of deception so as to avoid being deceived by others or themselves. But the thing about it is, that's not a description of what a skeptic is. That is a slogan. Very different. Because there are many people who use science and reason, and like people, we've discussed Rupert Sheldrake and people like that, and Graham Hancock before as well, who use that science and reason. They're highly qualified, experienced scientists in many cases, but they're labelled believers.
Yes.
And conversely, you get people who know absolutely nothing about science, and they never use its methods, and they have no intention of doing so, who say things like, no, I don't believe in ghosts and all that crap. There ain't no such thing. It's all in your head, innit? But that person would be described as a skeptic. So it's impossible to avoid the fact that it's opinions and conclusions about certain subjects that separate people called skeptics from those called non-skeptics, believers, woo-woos, whatever you call them. And it's just like it's true. I mean, how do you define? I suppose the way I define them is maybe people or a group of people who have a certain idea or a certain desire for the world to be a certain way, and that things like ghosts and that are not real, and that they want to create a way of enforcing that desire on reality. That, I think, is a more accurate description of what a skeptic is.
Exactly, yeah, but you just said there, forcing that desire. I mean, at the end of the day, they're going around, and effectively, I can't see it being any different to any other belief system.
Absolutely not.
It's not. And to go around the pub meetings, everything is absolutely fine, but what they're actually telling people is nowhere near fact. I mean, I make claims. I've got things to substantiate the claims. That's a lot more than just speech. I mean, as I say, talk's cheap. Show me why, or spirits can't exist, any scientific reason why they can't exist, absolutely fine, I'm comfortable with that. come down and take some of my recordings away and analyse them. Then tell me that this is not human speech. I'm happy with that. When they say there's no evidence out there, it's absolutely hilarious. There is more evidence for life after death if it's actually taken on board and analysed properly than there is for so many scientific theories out there that are put out as though they're fact.
They have several cop-outs that they use whenever you give them the information they want. There's one called raising the bar, which is this method they use, which is when...
You can't get away from the fact that, you know, I've invited people down to the workshop. They can hear for themselves, Becky or whatever speaking. They can analyse that information. It don't matter whether you class yourself as a skeptic, a scientist, a believer, a non-believer. You've got afters and letters after your name, you're a parapsychologist or whatever. At the end of the day, if you establish, yes, scientifically tested, that is a full sentence of human speech, that in itself is evidence that there's something going on. I can't ever put a spirit under a microscope and say, look, that speech has come from a spirit person that's died. But the mere fact you've got a voice from nowhere and no alternative explanation for it, it's as simple as that. You know, so to say there's no evidence of any kind, I just actually find personally quite hilarious.
Yeah, it's really quite. I think the main problem is that they will say like that. They'll use words like rational. Like I said, they don't even understand they have a belief system every bit as much as a religious person would.
I was on the ITV show, and I was told, the guy that I was on with said alternative rational explanation, you know, and I said, what is irrational about thinking a place might be haunted? You know, the fact that you're not even going to consider the fact and you jump straight into there must be an alternative explanation, that's not somebody being open-minded. Okay, there may be alternative explanations, but you never ever hear a skeptic, open-minded or closed-minded, say, yes, we've been going into this place, it may be haunted or it may not be haunted. It may be spirits, it may not be spirits. It's always an alternative explanation. And that's it. You know, anything spiritual is just automatically ignored.
I mean, they sometimes will say they'll try and play a role saying we're open-minded, but we need to prove the bird. They'll say things like the onus is one of their favourite words actually. The onus is on them to prove to us to prove the phenomenon to us. And then they'll go in there and they'll say, I mean, Darren Brown does this an awful lot, you know, because he goes on these ghost hunts. He's presented with evidence, but then he will attempt to use everything he can to debunk that. And what's the problem is that he goes into areas where he says, well, what is physically possible that could explain this as something other than paranormal? And then he'll go for something that is so unlikely and so unreasonable, yet it is maybe physically possible. And he'll say, well, that's a better explanation than saying it's paranormal, which to me is bad logic. You know,
if I, for argument's sake, had Darren Brown in my workshop now and says to Becky, can you say hello, Darren Brown? And she said, hello, Darren Brown. What would be taken from that?
Well, the problem is, you see. Sorry.
No, carry on.
He actually did this. He went off with Lou Gentili on a TV show, and he did like a ghost hunt with Lou Gentili, and then he came back and he said, and then he started saying that the EVP that he was picking up, he would say it was EVP, and he says the reason you're picking up this EVP is because that's electronic voice phenomena for the listeners if you're not familiar. Is because simply it's to do with the making of the digital recorder he was using. But then Lou Gentili didn't get the chance to explain that he'd made control test recordings as well.
I was going to say, one of the problems is that without realising, many paranormal investigators are actually throwing ammunition at skeptics by saying, I've got an EVP. An EVP has got nothing and never has had anything to do with spirit communication. As you know, the definition of an EVP is a sound made up from ambient sound, non-intelligent speech, etc., voice without intent. Okay, an EVP in its current scientific definition is what it says. It's an EVP. So if people say I've got an EVP, you're basically saying, look, I've got something here that's a sound that's made up, but it's a spirit. You know, that's why I reclassify mine as AVPs, actual voice phenomena. They fall outside the definition of the official definition of an EVP. It has to be more than one word, preferably a sentence, and it needs to be reply in direct answer to a question, which an EVP obviously isn't under its definition.
Thing is, if you get Becky to say some words in the area, they have this thing called Occam's razor. This is what skeptics use. It's called Occam's razor, and they always fall back on it. They love it, just like the words onus and things like that, and burden of evidence, things like that. But Occam's razor is a problem-solving method. If you want to solve a problem, you always select the most likely explanation first. For instance, if your radio breaks down, you change the batteries first before you open it up and fiddle with the insides, because the battery failing is the most likely cause of the radio stopping working. The problem with that is, though, that what is and is not more likely has to be known in advance. You have to know how the radio works before you start fixing it, in order to know that the batteries for failing is the most likely explanation for the radio not working. And the thing about when you apply this to things like your kind of work, Don, you're dealing with so many unknown parameters that basically it's a get-out-of-jail-free card for the skeptics. It's a joker they can play, which means they can debunk anything. It's a complete cop-out. They'll just say, they say the most ridiculous things. This is relating to the UFO phenomenon, but they'll say things like, well, there was an incident in North Wales many years ago where people saw a light in the sky and they felt an earthquake at the same time, and this was interpreted as some kind of UFO event. Now, one of the skeptics who's always debunked that and always believed there was no UFOs has always said, well, the thing is, though, earthquakes do happen, and so do meteors, these bolide meteors, which is what the light was seen. And then the answer was to that was, but you're saying these things happen at the same time? That's a pretty remarkable coincidence, isn't it? And he says, well, let's use Occam's razor. He says, what's more likely, that a UFO landed or that an earthquake and a bolide meteor happened at the same time? And this is an example of the terrible logic that the skeptics use, because it means that because one is a physically possible
get-out clause.
Yes, it's a complete cop-out. But they all believe it, and they all say, well, this is the rational way to behave. This is the rational.
That they all buy
and they don't even understand that they have a belief system. They think they're the ultimate neutral arbiters, and they're completely deluding themselves.
Let me tell you something. I've got a very important case to do in a few days' time from a lady who's suffering greatly, reportedly from poltergeist activity. She's told me a lot of things. Part of the process is interviewing people very thoroughly before I decide to take a case on. I've had her in tears, breaking down on the phone and everything. I'm not going there thinking, okay, I'm going to sort it out, she's got a poltergeist. As I explained to her, I take on board what she says, but I am effectively, when I go down to see her, going down as a skeptic. But like I say, there's a difference between being a closed-minded skeptic and being open-minded. It's vital. Me and the team, if we go anywhere, we are totally open-minded and don't take anything for granted. And that's what skepticism should be about.
Yeah, I call it skepticism with a C rather than with a K, and this is how I separate the two apart. It's pronounced the same, but a skeptic with a C, I think, is someone who is what, according to their definition, which is someone who their own self, their own persona of themselves. And I consider myself a skeptic with a C, but a skeptic with a K is the ones who say it's not true, and I'm going to prove it ain't true, and I don't care how much bad logic and how much ignorance and even aggression and violence I'm willing to use to enforce my will on reality.
The problem is now we've created such a situation with the amount of fake stuff out there anyway. If a photo is deemed too good to be true, then it also has to be branded a fake. Yep. I've seen this happen time and time, which begs the question, if someone produces, I've actually got a photo which is amazing, which I know to be 100% genuine. If I put that out there, you can guarantee it'll be labelled as fake straight away.
This is a big problem.
This is another problem, yeah.
We've got a terrible signal-to-noise ratio at the moment because special effects, visual effects are so good now and they're so accessible that anyone can make a very, very realistic fake ghost video that you can't really prove wrong. And the problem is, as you said, it's the ultimate little boy who cried wolf, isn't it? Through no fault of your own, you are. Because you go in there with something real and everyone goes, fake. It's not another CGI Photoshop thing, Well, very frustrating indeed.
We played some recordings earlier that were taken, which is supported by video evidence. Now, bearing in mind, in this country, video evidence is good enough in court to send people to prison for life. It's good enough in other countries to actually end their life. But it's not good enough as evidence that a paranormal investor puts out in support of the claim that it's paranormal. It doesn't seem to matter what goes out. Nothing's ever good enough.
Yeah. What the media doesn't help. We've been discussing the media. the media have a very, very bad attitude towards this. I mean, I know a guy, he probably doesn't want me to name him, but one guy I know who used to present ghost TV programs, he was going to make another series with this company, and he wanted to do it for real, you see. He said, I've got to do this for real. I've got to go in there and do what you're doing, Don, and make it honest. And the TV company says, yeah, you can do that, but we think just to get the listeners in, we want to put a couple of fake things in as well.
Yeah, see, that's
which, of course, Most Haunted does this all the time.
Just for sensationalism.
Yeah, and immediately my friend backed off and he says, no, it's got to be real. I said, no, we can't do this unless you're willing to just we're just gonna sex it up with a couple of fake, very impressive.
But the main reason for that is to make it entertaining, because in absence of anything else, the footage that we put out, the reason people love it so much is because it's literally as it happens. I've got some stuff going to the States that's going to be broadcast in the next couple of 3 months. And I maintain the same thing. Whoever I work with, if someone says, oh, yeah, do a TV series or whatever, unless it's as it happens, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in spicing things up, because this has caused so much damage to paranormal research and also people's reputations. Some people, okay, deserve it, but it makes my job and people like me, our jobs, so much more difficult. We've got so much crap we've got to cut through before we can actually get to the surface.
We're talking to Don Phillips, and you're listening to Planet X Live.
Planet X. The truth is on air.
The skeptics have been chasing wishy-washy evidence a lot of the time and having a ball with it. You know, I will actually chase the skeptics. I'm not bothered. I'm quite happy to chase after the skeptics. I mean, I've been saying for 2 years now, you know what, come and debunk me. Do what you want, but at the end of the day, don't judge me until you know me or you've worked with me. And I think that's a fair comment. Because they shout, because they're in a minority, whether they like it or not, the fact is they are, even on a global scale, in a minority. The other thing is that they've actually got nothing to back up what they're saying. Absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. So they have to shout as loud as they can. They have to discredit where they can. So when you get somebody that believes they're a medium who's actually not, and there is a lot of people out there like that, a very high percentage of people like that, they believe, although they're not, and they say, yeah, come and test me based on their belief, and obviously it all falls over. You know, there they are in the, you know, so you've seen the picture in the paper, Chris Fancy's team, you know, oh, we tested this person, and, you know, that proves that this is bullshit. But the point that they're missing is, that's what kind of scientific test is that? Because if a scientist is doing scientific tests, they repeat the same thing several times over quite a long period of time, not just get somebody in a laboratory for a couple of hours and say, you failed, that's it, it's bullshit. So there's a big imbalance there, isn't there, in actually the testing procedure in itself. I mean, I actually think it's flawed in that way.
Planet X.
That's fascinating, listening to you both summarise very, very well just what's happening with skeptics, or septics, as I like to call them. But terrific, both of you, for what you said there. Really appreciate it. And Ben, you're so passionate about that subject, particularly. It reflected very well about what Don is trying to achieve with his work. Now, Don, we know that you're going to be speaking at the upcoming Probe International Conference on the 5th and 6th of October. What's in store for you next? Because obviously your research it's moving forward, and perhaps in the last few hundred years there hasn't been a great deal since the parlor room seances of progression. What's in store for you next? Where are you going to go with your work and with your research, Don?
Me and the team will just carry on putting out what we actually do. You know, people keep saying there's no evidence. My answer to that would be, if you want some evidence, then send me the right people and I will supply you with some evidence.
And I believe you want to invite Planet X to take part in something in the future. What is it that you'd like us to join in with you for, Don?
Absolutely. It's great watching things on YouTube, but it cannot beat the experience of actually being there and witnessing it yourself. So at some time in the near future, I would like to invite you guys along on an investigation. You can be there, you can hear Becky, and you can take the evidence away to be independently analysed.
Oh, thank you very much. That'll be fun, won't it? That'll be great.
It will. It'll be good.
Very kind invitation to us here at Planet X to find out more about your work. Where can they go to find out all about what you've been doing, and how can our listeners contact you should they want you to come along and do some investigative work?
For more on me and the team and the work that we do, the website address is www.jsiparanormal.com. if anybody wishes to get in contact with us, the address is gsiparanormaluk@mail.com.
And what's your YouTube channel called, please, Don?
YouTube channel is GSI, but it's just the GSI Paranormal UK YouTube channel. If you actually type that into Google, it will actually take you straight to it.
That's terrific. Thanks, Don. That's great. We wish you all the best of luck with your investigative work with both yourself and the GSI Paranormal Investigation Team. We also hope that you enjoy your time at the Probe International Conference in Lytham St Anne's on the 5th and 6th of October. But for